The wind screamed like a dying animal across the Montana plains, and Zachary Stark knew that any soul caught in this blizzard would be dead by morning. He pulled his thick wool coat tighter around his shoulders as his horse, a sturdy bay mare named Copper, trudged through snow that was already knee-deep and rising fast. The January storm of 1884 had come out of nowhere, transforming the landscape from frozen but manageable to a white hell in less than an hour. Zachary had been checking his trap lines when the first flakes started falling, and he'd immediately turned back toward his cabin, knowing better than to trust Montana weather in the dead of winter. The temperature had dropped so fast he could feel the moisture in his nostrils freezing with each breath. His eyes watered against the wind, tears turning to ice on his cheeks. Copper whinnied nervously, her ears flat against her head as she pushed forward through the drifts. Zachary patted her neck with a gloved hand, murmuring words of encouragement that were immediately stolen by the howling wind. That's when he saw it. A dark shape in the snow, barely visible through the white curtain of falling ice. At first he thought it might be a fallen tree or a boulder he'd somehow never noticed before, but something made him pull Copper to a halt and squint harder through the storm. The shape was too small to be a tree, too irregular to be a rock. His heart hammered as he dismounted, his boots sinking into the powder. He stumbled forward, fighting against wind that seemed determined to push him backward. As he got closer, his blood ran cold. It was a person, curled on their side in the snow, already half buried. Zachary dropped to his knees and brushed away the accumulating snow, his hands shaking and not just from the cold. A woman's face appeared beneath his gloved fingers, her lips blue, her skin pale as death. Ice had formed on her eyelashes and in her dark hair. She wore a thin traveling coat, completely inadequate for this weather, and her hands were bare, the fingers an alarming shade of purple. "Madam," he shouted over the wind, shaking her shoulder gently. "Madam, can you hear me?" No response. He pressed his fingers against her neck, searching for a pulse, and nearly wept with relief when he felt a weak flutter beneath her frozen skin. She was alive, but just barely. There was no time to wonder what she was doing out here or where she'd come from. Zachary scooped her into his arms, shocked at how light she was, how fragile she felt through the layers of snow-crusted fabric. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and he could feel how cold she was even through his thick coat. Getting her onto Copper was a challenge. The mare danced nervously, frightened by the storm and the unfamiliar burden. Zachary managed to haul himself into the saddle with the unconscious woman cradled against his chest, one arm locked around her waist to keep her secure. She was so cold that holding her was like embracing a statue made of ice. "Come on, girl," he urged Copper, turning her toward home. "We've got to move." The cabin was 3 miles away, but it might as well have been 300. Visibility had dropped to almost nothing, and Zachary had to trust Copper's instincts to find the way. He kept his head down against the wind, sheltering the woman's face against his chest as best he could. Every few minutes he would check to make sure she was still breathing, terrified that he would feel her go still and lifeless in his arms. His muscles screamed with the effort of holding her steady as Copper plowed through drifts that reached her chest. The wind hit them in powerful gusts that threatened to knock them sideways. Snow pelted his face like thrown gravel, stinging and sharp. His fingers were going numb despite his gloves, and he couldn't feel his toes anymore. The woman hadn't moved or made a sound since he'd found her. Her breathing was so shallow he had to press his cheek close to her nose and mouth to detect it. He tried talking to her, shouting encouragement over the wind, telling her to hold on, to stay with him, but there was no response. Time became meaningless in the whiteout. It could have been 20 minutes or 2 hours when Zachary finally saw the dark shape of his cabin materializing through the snow. Relief flooded through him so intensely that his eyes stung with tears. Copper seemed to sense they were close to shelter because she picked up her pace, pushing through the last 100 yards with renewed determination. The barn was closer than the cabin, and Zachary guided Copper inside, grateful for the immediate reduction in wind. It was still brutally cold, but at least the structure provided some protection from the elements. He dismounted awkwardly, nearly falling with the woman still in his arms, but managed to keep his feet. "I'll be back for you, girl," he promised Copper, who was already moving toward her stall and the hay waiting there. The journey from barn to cabin was only 50 feet, but carrying the woman through waist-deep snow made it feel endless. By the time Zachary kicked open his cabin door and stumbled inside, he was gasping for breath, his lungs burning from the frigid air. He laid her on the floor in front of the fireplace, which still held glowing embers from the morning. Thank God he'd banked it properly before leaving. He threw fresh wood on the coals, blowing gently until flames began to lick at the dry timber. Once he was satisfied the fire would catch, he turned his attention back to the woman. Her lips were still blue, her skin deathly pale. Ice crusted her clothing and hair. Zachary's hands shook as he began removing her wet things, trying to be respectful but knowing that leaving her in frozen clothing would kill her. The thin coat came off first, stiff with ice, followed by a soaked wool dress that had probably been fine for travel on a normal day but was worse than useless in a blizzard. Underneath, she wore a corset and chemise, both damp. He hesitated, his face flushing despite the cold and the urgency of the situation, but he knew there was no choice. Everything wet had to come off. He unlaced the corset with fumbling fingers, pulled off the chemise, averting his eyes as much as possible. Her skin was like ice beneath his touch, and he could see no color in her extremities at all. Zachary grabbed every blanket he owned, wrapping her in layers of wool and fur. He built up the fire until it roared, filling the small cabin with blessed warmth. Then he removed his own wet coat and boots, and after a moment's hesitation, lay down beside her on the floor, pulling her close to share his body heat. She was so cold that pressing against her sent shivers through his whole body. He wrapped his arms around her blanket cocooned form and held her tight, willing his warmth into her frozen body. The fire crackled beside them, throwing dancing shadows on the log walls. "Come on," he whispered against her hair, which was starting to thaw, releasing the scent of lavender. "Come on, stay with me. You're safe now. You're going to be all right." He didn't know if he was trying to convince her or himself. He'd seen men die of exposure before, seen them slip away despite every effort to save them. The woman in his arms was in bad shape, worse than anyone he'd pulled from the cold before. Time passed. The storm raged outside, wind screaming around the cabin's corners, snow piling up against the walls. Inside, Zachary held the stranger and prayed to a God he hadn't spoken to in years. He rubbed her arms and legs through the blankets, trying to encourage circulation. He kept the fire blazing hot. He talked to her, telling her stories about growing up in Kentucky, about coming west after the war, about anything and everything just to fill the silence. Slowly, so slowly he almost didn't notice at first, color began to return to her face. The deathly blue pallor faded, replaced by a pink flush. Her breathing deepened, became more regular. Her body, which had been rigid with cold, began to relax against his. It was near midnight, judging by the old clock on his mantel, when she finally stirred. Zachary felt her move in his arms, heard a soft moan escape her lips. Her eyelids fluttered, and then opened, revealing eyes the color of amber in firelight. For a long moment she simply stared at him, confusion evident in her gaze. Then awareness seemed to crash over her all at once. She gasped and tried to pull away, her eyes going wide with alarm. "Easy," Zachary said quickly, loosening his hold but not letting go entirely. "Easy now, you're safe. You're in my cabin. I found you in the storm." She blinked at him, trying to focus. Her voice when she spoke was hoarse and barely above a whisper. "Where? What happened? You were caught in the blizzard. I found you about 3 miles from here, nearly frozen to death. Do you remember anything?" Her brow furrowed as she tried to think. Zachary could see the effort it took, could see exhaustion written in every line of her face. "I was. There was a stagecoach. We were traveling from Helena to Hecla. The storm came so fast. The horses spooked and the coach overturned. I got thrown clear, but I hit my head. I tried to find shelter, but I couldn't see anything. I just kept walking and then I found you," Zachary finished gently. "The others from the coach," tears welled in her amber eyes. "I don't know. I couldn't find them in the snow. I tried to go back, but I couldn't tell which direction I'd come from. Everything was white. I just kept walking, trying to stay warm, but I got so tired. I sat down just for a moment and then—" "SHH, it's all right," Zachary soothed. "You're safe now. Once the storm passes, we'll look for the others. But right now, you need to rest. You came very close to dying out there." She seemed to notice for the first time that she was wrapped in blankets and pressed against a strange man in front of a fire. Her cheeks flushed pink. "My clothes were soaked through and freezing. I had to remove them or you would have died. I didn't." He cleared his throat, his own face heating. "I tried to be respectful, madam. I only did what was necessary." She studied his face for a long moment, and whatever she saw there seemed to reassure her because she nodded slowly. "Thank you. You saved my life. Couldn't very well leave you to freeze, could I?" Zachary said, trying to lighten the moment. "I'm Zachary Stark, by the way." "Most folks just call me Zach, Eleanor Catherine," she replied. "Eleanor Kimble, but people call me Ellie." "Well, Miss Kimble, you picked one hell of a storm to get lost in. This is the worst blizzard I've seen in 3 years. Just my luck," Ellie murmured. She tried to sit up but immediately swayed, her face going pale. Zachary caught her, easing her back down. "Not so fast. You've been through a serious ordeal. Your body needs time to recover. But the others from the coach, we have to help them." "Can't help anyone in this storm," Zachary said firmly. "It would be suicide to go out there now. The wind is strong enough to knock a man off his feet, and the snow is already over 3 feet deep in places. We'll search as soon as it's safe, I promise you that." Ellie looked like she wanted to argue, but another wave of exhaustion seemed to wash over her. Her eyes drifted shut despite her obvious efforts to keep them open. "So tired," she whispered. "Then sleep," Zachary told her gently. "You're safe here. I'll keep the fire going and watch over you. Rest now." She was asleep within moments, her breathing deep and even. Zachary held her a while longer, making sure her color stayed good, that her breathing remained steady. When he was confident she was truly all right, he carefully extracted himself from the pile of blankets and stood up. His muscles protested, stiff from lying on the hard floor and from the earlier exertion of carrying Ellie through the storm. He stretched, working out the kinks, then checked the fire and added more wood. The cabin was warm now, almost too warm, but he wasn't about to let the temperature drop. He went to the window and peered out through the frost-covered glass. The storm showed no signs of abating. Snow fell in thick sheets, driven nearly horizontal by the wind. Drifts were building up against the barn and the cabin. They were well and truly trapped until the weather cleared. Zachary's thoughts turned to Ellie's story about the stagecoach. If there had been other passengers, they were in serious trouble. The driver and any survivors would have tried to stay with the coach or seek shelter, but in a storm like this, Options were limited. He knew every inch of this land, though, and there weren't many places between Helena and Hecla where a coach could find protection from weather like this. He looked back at Ellie, sleeping peacefully by the fire. She was beautiful, he'd noticed, though he'd tried not to think about it while he was removing her wet clothing and wrapping her in blankets. Even half frozen and unconscious, there had been something arresting about her features. Now, with color back in her cheeks and her dark hair spread across the pillow he'd slipped beneath her head, she was lovely. Zachary shook his head at himself. The woman had nearly died, was probably worried sick about fellow travelers, and here he was noticing how pretty she was. He needed to focus on practical matters. He gathered her wet clothing from where he'd dropped it near the fire. The thin coat, the wool dress, the undergarments, all of it was still damp despite the fire's heat. He hung everything on hooks near the fireplace to dry, then rummaged through his belongings for something she could wear. He didn't have much that would fit her. He'd lived alone for the past 5 years, ever since coming to Montana, and hadn't exactly accumulated a wardrobe for female guests. Finally, he found one of his own shirts and a pair of suspenders. It would have to do until her own clothes dried. The storm continued through the night and into the next day. Zachary dozed in his chair near the fire, jerking awake every hour or so to check on Ellie and add wood to the flames. She slept deeply, her body recovering from its brush with death. It was mid-morning when she finally woke again. Zachary was at the stove, frying salt pork and heating beans for breakfast, when he heard her stir. He turned to find her sitting up, the blankets clutched to her chest, looking around the cabin with wide eyes. "Good morning," he said quietly. "How are you feeling?" Ellie's hand went to her head, touching a bump he'd noticed the night before. "Like I was hit by a train, and so thirsty." "That's the cold. Your body is trying to recover." He poured water from a pitcher into a tin cup and brought it to her. She drank it gratefully, draining the cup in seconds. He refilled it twice more before her thirst was satisfied. "Thank you," she said again. Then, looking down at herself, "I don't suppose my clothes are dry." "Not yet. The dress is still pretty damp. I found a shirt of mine you can wear if you'd like. It'll be big on you, but it's clean and dry." She nodded, and Zachary discreetly turned his back while she maneuvered into the shirt under the cover of the blankets. When he turned around again, she looked almost comical, drowning in fabric that fell past her knees. She'd rolled up the sleeves several times, but they still hung past her fingertips. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Zachary found himself fighting a smile. Ellie caught his expression and raised an eyebrow. "Something funny, Mr. Stark." "Just that you look like a little girl playing dress-up in her father's clothes," he admitted. To his relief, she smiled back, though it was a small, tired expression. "Well, it's warm and dry, which is more than I can say for my own things, so I'll take it. Are you hungry?" "I've got breakfast cooking." As if on cue, her stomach growled loudly. Ellie's cheeks flushed pink. "I suppose that answers that question." They ate together at his small wooden table, Ellie devouring the simple meal with an enthusiasm that spoke to her hunger. Zachary found himself watching her between bites, curious about this woman who had quite literally fallen into his life in the middle of a blizzard. "Can I ask what brought you to Montana?" he ventured. "You don't sound like you're from around here." Ellie swallowed a mouthful of beans. "Is it that obvious? I'm from Boston originally. I was traveling to Hecla to take a position as a school teacher. The town sent for me after their last teacher moved back east. Boston to Montana is quite a journey. That's a big change." "I wanted a change," Ellie said, and something in her tone suggested there was more to that story. "I wanted to see the frontier, to do something meaningful. Teaching children on the edge of civilization seemed like a worthy pursuit. It is, Zachary agreed. Though I have to tell you, Hecla isn't much to look at. Small mining town, maybe 200 people on a good day. Gets mighty quiet in the winter. Sounds perfect, Ellie said, and she seemed to mean it. I've had enough of cities and crowds to last a lifetime. They finished eating in comfortable silence, and then Zachary began clearing the dishes. Through the window, he could see that the snow had finally stopped falling, though the sky remained a threatening gray. The wind had died down considerably. "Storm's past," he announced. "I should get out there and see about finding that stagecoach. You stay here by the fire and keep warm." Ellie stood up quickly, then swayed as dizziness hit her. Zachary steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "You're in no condition to go out there," he said firmly, "but I can help. I can show you where the coach was when it overturned. Do you actually remember where that was? In that storm, with everything white and the wind blowing, could you find the spot again?" Ellie opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again, her shoulders sagging. "No," she admitted quietly. "I have no idea where I was. I just kept walking, trying to stay ahead of the cold. Then you stay here. I know this land like the back of my hand. If that coach is within 20 miles, I'll find it. But I need to know you're safe here by the fire, not out in the cold risking your health again." "Deal." She looked like she wanted to protest, but finally nodded. "Deal. But please, if you find anyone, I'll do everything I can," Zachary promised. "I'll bring them back here where it's warm. We'll take care of them." He bundled up in his warmest clothes, wrapping a thick scarf around his face and pulling a fur hat down over his ears. Before he left, he made sure Ellie had everything she needed within reach, plenty of water and the remaining food from breakfast, extra blankets and enough wood to keep the fire going. "Bar the door after I leave," he instructed. "Don't open it for anyone but me. I'll knock 3 times, pause, then twice more. That way you'll know it's me." "You think there's danger?" Ellie asked, worry creeping into her voice. "Probably not, but better safe than sorry. There are occasionally drifters passing through, and not all of them are friendly, just a precaution." He hated leaving her alone, but there was no choice. If there were survivors from the stagecoach, they'd been out in the cold for over 24 hours now. Time was critical. The snow outside was deeper than Zachary had anticipated, coming up to his thighs in places where the wind had created drifts. He waded through it to the barn, where Copper whickered a greeting. The mare had weathered the storm well, safe in her stall with hay and water. "Ready for some exercise, girl?" Zachary asked, saddling her up. "We've got people to find." The landscape had been completely transformed by the storm. Familiar landmarks were buried under snow, and what had been a relatively easy trail was now an obstacle course of hidden hazards. Zachary had to trust Copper's instincts and his own knowledge of the terrain to navigate. He headed in the direction Ellie had come from, based on where he'd found her. If she'd been walking away from the overturned coach, then logically it should be somewhere to the east, probably along the main road from Helena. The problem was that the main road was completely invisible under several feet of snow. It took 3 hours of searching before he found the first sign. A piece of dark fabric, probably torn from someone's coat, caught on a bare branch sticking up through the snow. Zachary dismounted and examined it, his heart sinking. The fabric was stiff with frozen blood. He pressed on, following a line from where he'd found the fabric. Another 100 yards and Copper suddenly balked, refusing to move forward. Zachary dismounted and carefully probed the snow ahead with a long stick he'd brought for exactly this purpose. His stick hit something solid. He began digging with his gloved hands, scooping away snow until he uncovered the top of the overturned stagecoach. The sight made his stomach drop. The coach was on its side, half buried in a drift. One of the wheels was completely shattered, probably from hitting a rock hidden under the snow. The door was hanging open, snow piled inside. "Hello," Zachary called out. "Anyone here? Can anyone hear me?" No response. He climbed into the tilted coach, his heart pounding. Inside, he found evidence of the crash. Luggage was scattered everywhere, some of it split open, personal belongings spilled into the snow. There was blood on the wooden bench, frozen dark, but no people. Living or dead, there was no one inside the coach. Zachary climbed back out and began searching the area around the wreck. He found tracks, though they were mostly filled in with snow. Someone had survived the crash and walked away. Following the faint depressions, he found more evidence. A man's hat, a broken whiskey bottle, and then, 50 yards from the coach, a body. The man was half buried in snow, frozen solid. He was wearing a driver's coat, and when Zachary carefully turned him over, he could see the man's neck was bent at an unnatural angle. He'd probably died instantly when the coach overturned. Zachary said a quiet prayer over the body, then continued searching. The tracks suggested there had been at least one other person, possibly two. He followed the trail as best he could, but the wind and fresh snow had obliterated most of the signs. An hour of searching turned up nothing more. Either the other passengers had survived and made it to some kind of shelter, or they were buried under snow somewhere and wouldn't be found until spring thaw. Zachary hated the thought, but he was realistic about the situation. Ellie had been incredibly lucky. Anyone else caught in that storm without immediate help would have died. He headed back to the coach and began the grim task of loading the driver's body onto Copper's back. The mare didn't like it, dancing nervously, but she was well trained and eventually stood still. Zachary secured the body as best he could, then began the journey home. The sun was already setting by the time he made it back to his cabin. The knock pattern he'd arranged with Ellie got a quick response. She pulled open the door, relief evident on her face. "Thank God you're back." "I was so worried." Then she saw what was draped across Copper's back and her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh no. I'm sorry," Zachary said gently. "I found the coach. The driver didn't make it. His neck was broken, probably died right away." Tears spilled down Ellie's cheeks. "Did you find anyone else?" "No. There were signs that someone else survived the crash and walked away from it, but I lost the trail. They could have found shelter somewhere, or—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Ellie wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite the warmth from the cabin. "There were two other passengers besides me. A man traveling to work in the mines and a woman going to meet her husband in Hecla. And of course the driver. Poor Mr. Henshaw. He had a wife and 3 children in Helena. We'll make sure he gets a proper burial once the ground thaws," Zachary promised. "For now, I'll store him in the barn. The cold will preserve him until we can get him back to his family." It was grim work, but necessary. Once it was done, Zachary took care of Copper, making sure she had food and water before heading back to the cabin. Inside, he found Ellie sitting by the fire, her knees drawn up to her chest, staring into the flames. He washed up at the basin, scrubbing away the grime and sweat of the day's search. When he turned around, Ellie was watching him. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Zachary sat down in his chair, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was. "Now we wait for better weather. Another storm could roll in any time, and I don't want us to get caught out in it. Once we have a few clear days, I'll take you into Hecla. It's about 10 miles from here." "What about the other passengers? Shouldn't we keep searching?" "We will," Zachary assured her, "but not at the risk of our own lives. If they found shelter, they'll stay put until the weather clears." "If they didn't?" He met her eyes steadily. "Then there's nothing we can do for them now except pray." Ellie nodded slowly, accepting the harsh reality. You must think I'm terribly naive, a city girl who had no business coming west. I think you're brave, Zachary said, and he meant it. You came all this way to teach children to make a difference. That takes courage. What happened wasn't your fault. That storm came out of nowhere. Even folks who have lived here their whole lives got caught off guard. If you hadn't found me. Ellie trailed off, her voice catching. But I did find you. You're alive, you're safe, and you're going to be fine. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Finally, Ellie spoke again. Tell me about yourself, Mr. Stark. How did you end up all the way out here? Zachary leaned back in his chair, considering how much to share. Not much to tell, really. I grew up in Kentucky, joined the army when the war started, fought for the Union. After it was over, I couldn't go back home. Too many memories, too much pain. So I headed west like a lot of other lost souls. Drifted around for a while, doing odd jobs until I ended up here in Montana. I work as a guide and tracker, help hunters find game, lead expeditions into the mountains. During the winter, I trap furs. It's a quiet life, but it suits me. Do you get lonely? Ellie asked. Out here all by yourself? Sometimes, Zachary admitted. But I learned to appreciate the solitude. After the war, after seeing so much death and destruction, I needed the quiet, needed space to think, to heal. Ellie studied his face in the firelight. You're a good man, Zachary Stark. A lot of people would have just kept riding in that storm, would have worried about saving themselves and no one else. I'm not sure about that, Zachary said, uncomfortable with the praise. I just did what anyone would do. No, Ellie said firmly. Not everyone. You risked your life to save a complete stranger. Then you carried me miles through a blizzard and cared for me when I couldn't care for myself. That's not nothing. That's everything. The intensity in her amber eyes made Zachary's breath catch. He looked away, his heart doing strange things in his chest. You should get some rest. You're still recovering. Ellie looked like she wanted to say something more, but instead she just nodded. Where should I sleep? Take the bed, Zachary said, gesturing to the simple wooden frame in the corner of the cabin. I'll sleep in the chair by the fire. I can't take your bed. You've already done so much. I insist. You need proper rest to recover. Besides, I've slept in worse places than a chair by a warm fire. Ellie seemed to recognize that arguing would be pointless. She stood up, still wrapped in the oversized shirt, and made her way to the bed. Zachary turned his back to give her privacy as she settled under the quilts. Good night, Zachary, she called softly. Good night, Ellie. He sat in his chair, listening to the fire pop and crackle, aware of every small sound Ellie made as she shifted in the bed. Eventually, her breathing deepened and evened out, and he knew she was asleep. Zachary stared into the flames and tried to ignore the fact that his carefully ordered, solitary life had just been turned completely upside down. The next few days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Zachary would wake early, build up the fire, and prepare a simple breakfast while Ellie slept. She would emerge from the bedroom looking rumpled and beautiful, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, wearing his oversized shirt like a nightgown. They would eat together, talking about everything and nothing. During the days, Zachary taught Ellie about survival in the wilderness. He showed her how to read the weather by watching the sky and the behavior of animals. He taught her which plants were edible and which were poisonous, how to start a fire with damp wood, how to find water even in winter. Ellie was an eager student, asking intelligent questions and remembering everything he told her. She had a quick mind and a natural curiosity that Zachary found refreshing. Most city folks he'd met seemed to think the wilderness was either terrifying or romantic, with no middle ground. Ellie saw it clearly, understanding both its dangers and its beauty. In the evenings, They would sit by the fire and talk. Ellie told him about her life in Boston, about growing up in a wealthy family that expected her to make a suitable marriage and host elegant parties. She described feeling suffocated by the restrictions placed on her, the endless rules about what a lady could and couldn't do. "That's why I became a teacher," she explained one night. "It was one of the few professions considered acceptable for a woman of my station. And it gave me a way to be useful, to do something meaningful with my life instead of just waiting to become some man's decorative wife." "Is that why you came west? To escape an unwanted marriage?" Ellie smiled ruefully. "Is it that obvious? There was a man my parents wanted me to marry. Harrison Whitmore III, heir to a banking fortune, perfectly suitable in every way except that I couldn't stand him. He was pompous and condescending and treated me like I was a pretty ornament to be displayed. When I refused him, my parents were furious. They said I was throwing away my future, that I'd regret it. But I couldn't marry someone I didn't love, someone who didn't respect me as a person." "Good for you," Zachary said warmly. "Takes courage to stand up to family like that." "It didn't feel courageous. It felt terrifying. But then I saw an advertisement looking for teachers in Montana, and it seemed like fate, a chance to start over, to build a life on my own terms." She laughed softly. "Though I have to admit, nearly dying in a blizzard wasn't quite the fresh start I had in mind." "Fair enough," Zachary chuckled. "Then more seriously, what about you? Have you ever been married?" "No," Zachary said quietly. "I was engaged once before the war. Her name was Mary. She was beautiful and kind, and we were planning to marry when I came back from the fighting. But I was gone for 4 years, and I came back a different man, harder, haunted. She tried to understand, but I couldn't talk about what I'd seen, what I'd done. Eventually she found someone else, someone who could give her the life she deserved. I couldn't blame her." Ellie reached over and squeezed his hand. "I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. I've made my peace with it." "Still," Ellie said softly, "it must have hurt." "It did. But pain fades if you give it enough time." Their eyes met across the firelight, and something passed between them, an understanding that didn't require words. They were both running from their pasts in different ways, both seeking something they couldn't quite name. A week after Zachary had found Ellie in the snow, the weather finally cleared enough for travel. The sky was a brilliant blue, cloudless and crisp. The temperature was still well below freezing, but the wind had died down and the sun was bright. "We should go to Hecla today," Zachary announced over breakfast. "The trail will be passable, and you need to let folks know you're alive. They'll have heard about the stagecoach not arriving and will be worried." Ellie nodded, but Zachary noticed she didn't look particularly enthusiastic. "You're right, of course. I should get there and start my new position." "You don't sound very excited about it." "I am," Ellie said quickly. I've gotten used to it here, the quiet, the peace, your company." Zachary felt his heart skip a beat. Over the past week, he'd grown accustomed to having Ellie around. He liked waking up to find her by the fire, liked the sound of her laughter, liked the way she challenged his ideas and made him think about things from a different perspective. The thought of taking her to Hecla and saying goodbye made his chest ache in a way that surprised him. "I've enjoyed your company too," he admitted. "The cabin's going to seem awfully quiet once you're gone." Their eyes met and held. Zachary could see his own feelings reflected in Ellie's amber gaze, a mixture of longing and uncertainty and something deeper that neither of them seemed quite ready to name. Ellie broke the moment first, looking down at her plate. "I suppose I should get ready. Is my dress dry? Should be by now." "I'll get it for you." An hour later, they were ready to leave. Ellie wore her own dress again, now clean and dry, though Zachary had insisted she also wear one of his heavy coats over it. She looked small and fragile bundled up in his clothes, but her eyes were bright with determination. Zachary had saddled Copper and loaded her with minimal supplies for the journey. He helped Ellie mount, then swung up behind her, his arms around her waist to hold the reins. He tried not to think about how perfectly she fit against him, how right it felt to hold her like this. The ride to Hecla took most of the day, even following the main road. The snow was deep, and they had to stop frequently to rest Copper. They passed the site of the overturned stagecoach, now mostly buried under fresh snow. Ellie turned her face into Zachary's chest, not wanting to look. As they rode, they made plans. Zachary would check with the local marshal about the missing passengers and arrange for proper burial of the driver's body. Ellie would meet with the town council and the families of her students. They would both ask about temporary housing until Ellie could find permanent accommodations. Hecla appeared on the horizon just as the sun was beginning to set. It was a small town, just as Zachary had described, consisting of one main street lined with wooden buildings. A general store, a saloon, a church, a schoolhouse, a blacksmith, and a handful of other businesses. Houses spread out from the main street in irregular patterns, smoke rising from their chimneys. People stopped and stared as Zachary and Ellie rode down the main street. Strangers were always noticed in small towns, and Zachary could see recognition dawning on some faces as they realized this might be the missing schoolteacher. They stopped in front of the general store, where a small crowd was already gathering. A portly man with a badge on his vest pushed through the group. "You must be Miss Kimble," he said, helping Ellie dismount. "We'd heard the stage went missing in the storm, feared the worst, to be honest. I'm Marshal Tom Brennan." "Yes, I'm Eleanor Kimble," Ellie confirmed. "This is Zachary Stark. He saved my life, found me in the blizzard and took me to his cabin." The marshal turned to Zachary, respect in his eyes. "We're in your debt, Mr. Stark. The whole town's been worried sick since the stage didn't arrive." A middle-aged woman pushed forward, her face creased with concern. "Miss Kimble, I'm Martha Henderson. My husband and I are on the town council. We're so relieved you're safe. We have a room prepared for you at the boarding house." More people crowded around, all talking at once, asking questions, expressing relief that Ellie was alive. Zachary felt himself being pushed to the edges of the group, separated from Ellie by the press of bodies. He caught her eye across the crowd. She looked overwhelmed, a little frightened by all the attention. He wanted to push back through and stand at her side, but these were her people now, her new community. He had no place here. Marshal Brennan eventually managed to restore some order. "Now, folks, let's give Miss Kimble some space. She's been through an ordeal and needs rest. Mr. Stark, I'll need to get a statement from you about finding the coach. If you could come by my office." Zachary nodded. "Of course. I should also tell you that I found the driver's body. He's at my cabin. I can lead a party back to retrieve him and to search for the other passengers once you're ready." "We'll organize that for tomorrow," the marshal said. "For now, let's get Miss Kimble settled." The crowd began to disperse, Martha Henderson taking charge of Ellie and leading her toward the boarding house. Ellie kept looking back over her shoulder at Zachary, her expression full of something he couldn't quite read. Zachary followed the marshal to a small office on the main street. He gave his statement, describing finding Ellie, the storm, and later discovering the overturned coach and the driver's body. The marshal wrote it all down carefully. "You did a good thing, Mr. Stark," Brennan said when they were finished. "Most men wouldn't have gone out in that storm, let alone stop to help a stranger." "I'm just glad I found her in time," Zachary replied. "The town would like to show its appreciation. Let me buy you a drink at the saloon." Zachary wanted to refuse, wanted to ride back to his cabin and his solitary life, but something made him accept. Maybe it was the thought of the empty miles ahead, or the even emptier cabin waiting for him. Or maybe he just wasn't ready to say goodbye to Hecla and the possibility of seeing Ellie again. The saloon was warm and crowded, full of miners and workers warming themselves with whiskey after a long day. The marshal bought Zachary a drink, and then someone else bought him another, and soon he was surrounded by grateful townspeople wanting to hear the story of the rescue firsthand. Zachary told the story, leaving out the more intimate details about warming Ellie by the fire and the week they'd spent together in his cabin. That was private, something that belonged just to them. It was late when he finally extracted himself from the saloon. The marshal had offered him a room at the boarding house for the night, but Zachary declined. He couldn't bear the thought of being under the same roof as Ellie and not being able to talk to her, to see her. He was preparing to mount Copper for the long ride home when he heard his name called softly from the shadows. Zachary, wait. He turned to find Ellie standing in the alley beside the boarding house, wrapped in a shawl against the cold. His heart leaped at the sight of her. Ellie, what are you doing out here? You should be inside where it's warm. I had to see you before you left. She came closer, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. I didn't get a chance to properly say goodbye. You don't owe me anything, Zachary said gently. You're where you're supposed to be now, with your people ready to start your new life. Is that it then? You're just going to ride away and we'll never see each other again. The pain in her voice matched the ache in his chest. What else can we do? You have responsibilities here. The children are counting on you. The town is counting on you. And what about what I want? Ellie demanded, her eyes flashing in the moonlight. Don't I get a say in this? What do you want, Ellie? The question came out rougher than Zachary intended, raw with emotion he'd been trying to suppress. I want you, she said simply. These past few days with you have been the happiest I've been in years. I know it's crazy, I know we barely know each other, but when I'm with you everything just feels right. Like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Zachary's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. I feel it too. God help me. I've been trying not to, but I feel it too. But Ellie, I live alone in a cabin in the middle of nowhere. I have nothing to offer you, no proper home, no social standing, nothing but a hard life in a harsh land. I don't care about any of that, Ellie insisted. I didn't come west looking for comfort or social standing. I came looking for freedom, for a chance to live life on my own terms. And I found something I wasn't even looking for. I found you. You haven't even started your job yet. You can't throw it away before you've given it a chance. You're right, Ellie acknowledged. I have a responsibility to the children, to the town that brought me here. But that doesn't mean this has to be goodbye forever. You're only 10 miles away. You could visit. I could visit you when school's not in session. Zachary wanted to believe it could work, wanted it so badly he could taste it. But he'd learned the hard way that wanting something wasn't enough. What if you realize this is just gratitude? I saved your life, and you're confusing that with something more. Ellie stepped closer, so close he could see the flecks of gold in her amber eyes. Do you really believe that? Because I don't. This is real, Zachary. What I feel for you is real. Ellie. He started, but she cut him off. Don't tell me you don't feel the same way. I've seen how you look at me. I've felt it in the way you hold me when we ride. This connection between us, it's not one-sided and you know it. She was right, and they both knew it. Zachary had felt it from almost the first moment. From the second she'd opened her eyes in his cabin and looked at him with those incredible amber eyes. He tried to fight it, tried to tell himself it was impossible, but standing here in the moonlight with her looking at him like he was her whole world, he couldn't lie anymore. You're right, he admitted quietly. I feel it too. I've been falling for you since the moment you woke up in my arms. But I'm scared, Ellie. I'm scared of hurting you, of not being what you need. Then don't run away, Ellie said, reaching up to touch his face with her gloved hand. Stay, give us a chance. I can't stay in town. I'd go crazy cooped up like that. I'm not asking you to change who you are. I'm just asking you not to disappear. Come see me when you can. Let me visit your cabin when I have time off. Let's see where this goes instead of ending it before it even starts. Zachary covered her hand with his, turning his face into her palm. What if it doesn't work? What if we're too different? Then at least we'll know we tried. But I think we're more alike than you realize. We're both running from something, both looking for a place to belong. Maybe we can find that with each other. The hope in her voice, the conviction in her eyes broke down the last of Zachary's resistance. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, breathing in the lavender scent of her hair. All right, he whispered against her temple. All right, we'll try. Ellie pulled back just enough to look up at him, her face radiant with joy. Really? You mean it? I mean it. I don't know how we'll make it work, but we'll figure it out together. She laughed, a sound of pure happiness, and threw her arms around his neck. Zachary lifted her off her feet, spinning her around, both of them grinning like fools in the cold Montana night. When he set her down again, they stood there for a long moment, just looking at each other. Zachary reached up to tuck a strand of dark hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. I should kiss you, he said softly. I've wanted to for days. Then why don't you? Ellie challenged, her eyes sparkling. Zachary didn't need any more encouragement. He lowered his head and captured her lips with his, and the world fell away. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but quickly deepened into something more passionate. Ellie melted against him, her hands fisting in his coat, and Zachary felt like he was drowning in the best possible way. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ellie was smiling. I've been wanting you to do that for days, too. I'm an idiot for waiting so long, Zachary murmured, then kissed her again because he couldn't help himself. Eventually, reluctantly, they forced themselves apart. Ellie shivered, and Zachary realized she must be freezing. You need to get back inside before you catch your death, he said. When will I see you again? How about Sunday? You'll have the day off from school and I can ride in for the day. Sunday, Ellie agreed. That's 4 days from now. I'll count every minute. So will I. One more kiss, longer this time, and then Ellie was slipping back into the boarding house, looking over her shoulder at him one last time before disappearing inside. Zachary stood in the cold for a long moment, touching his lips where he could still feel the warmth of hers. Then he mounted Copper and began the long ride home, his heart lighter than it had been in years. The cabin was dark and cold when he arrived hours later. Zachary lit a fire and stood warming his hands, looking around at the space that had felt so comfortable and sufficient just days ago. Now it felt empty, hollow without Ellie's presence to fill it. He noticed her scent still lingered faintly in the air, lavender and something uniquely her. The shirt she'd borrowed was folded neatly on the chair. He picked it up, held it for a moment, then carefully put it away. 4 days until Sunday. 4 days until he could see her again. It was going to be the longest 4 days of his life. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold. Zachary was up before the sun, nervous energy driving him from bed. He cleaned the cabin from top to bottom, then himself, scrubbing away days of grime and shaving carefully. He put on his best shirt, the one he usually saved for the rare occasions he went to town, and checked his appearance in the small mirror over the wash basin. He looked older than his 32 years, he thought. Lines around his eyes from squinting into harsh sunlight and wind. Scars on his face and body from war and wilderness. But his eyes were bright with an excitement he hadn't felt in a long time. The ride to Hecla seemed to take forever, though Copper made good time on the now well-packed trail. Zachary's heart was pounding by the time the town came into view. He told himself he was being ridiculous, acting like a nervous boy courting his first girl. But Ellie wasn't just any girl, and this felt like the start of something important, something that could change his life. He found her waiting for him outside the boarding house, dressed in a simple blue dress that brought out the gold in her eyes. Her face lit up when she saw him, and Zachary felt his own smile grow to match hers. "You came," she said, sounding both delighted and relieved. "I said I would, didn't I?" He dismounted and took her hands in his. "Did you think I wouldn't? I was a little worried you might have come to your senses and decided this was all too complicated." "Oh, I definitely think it's too complicated," Zachary said with a grin. "But I don't care. I'm here anyway." Ellie squeezed his hands. "I'm glad. Come on, I want to show you the schoolhouse, and then maybe we could have lunch at the boarding house. Mrs. Henderson makes the most wonderful stew." They walked through town together, Ellie chattering excitedly about her first few days of teaching. She had 15 students ranging in age from 6 to 14, children of miners and shopkeepers and farmers who'd settled in the area. They were eager to learn, she said, if a bit rough around the edges. The schoolhouse was a simple building, one room with a wood stove, rows of benches, and a slate board at the front. Ellie showed him around with obvious pride, pointing out the books the town had scraped together, the supplies she'd brought from Boston, the artwork the children had already produced. "It's not much," she said, "but it's mine. I'm actually making a difference here, helping these children learn to read and write and think. It feels good." "I can see that," Zachary said, watching the way her whole face glowed when she talked about her students. "You're a natural teacher." They had lunch at the boarding house, where Mrs. Henderson fussed over them both and made knowing comments about what a handsome couple they made. Then they went for a walk to the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open land. "Tell me about your week," Ellie said, taking his arm as they strolled. "What have you been doing?" "Missing you mostly," Zachary admitted, "and thinking about you, and counting the hours until Sunday." Ellie laughed, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I did the same thing." The children probably thought I was crazy, staring out the window with a silly smile on my face. "What are we doing, Ellie?" Zachary asked, not for the first time. "I mean, what's the end game here? We can't court properly when I live 10 miles away and you're working 6 days a week." "So we make it work in our own way," Ellie said. "You come visit when you can, I visit you when I have breaks from school, we write letters, we figure it out as we go. And if people talk, if they think it's improper, let them talk. I didn't come all the way to Montana to worry about what's proper." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "Zachary, I meant what I said the other night. I'm falling in love with you. I know it's fast, I know it's crazy, but it's true. And if you feel the same way, then we'll find a way to make this work." Zachary's heart swelled in his chest. "I do feel the same way. I love you, Ellie. I think I started loving you the moment you opened your eyes in my cabin and looked at me like I was a miracle." Ellie's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Say it again." "I love you, Eleanor Kimble." "I love you too, Zachary Stark." He kissed her then, right there on the edge of town where anyone could see, and he didn't care. Let them talk. Let them think what they wanted. He'd found something precious in the middle of a blizzard, something worth fighting for. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern. Zachary would ride into Hecla every Sunday, arriving early and staying as late as he could. He and Ellie would spend the day together, walking, talking, stealing kisses when they thought no one was looking. Sometimes they'd join the town for church services, sitting together in the back pew. Other times they'd pack a lunch and ride out into the countryside, just the two of them and Copper. On weekdays, they wrote letters. Zachary would ride into town midweek to drop off his letters and collect Ellie's. Her handwriting was neat and precise, her words full of observations about her students and questions about his life. He treasured every page, reading them over and over by firelight in his cabin. Spring came slowly to Montana, the snow gradually melting to reveal the land beneath. The days grew longer and warmer. Zachary's trap lines dried up with the changing season, and he took on work as a guide, leading hunting parties and surveying expeditions into the mountains. The work kept him busy, but left his Sundays free for Ellie. The town had accepted their courtship, though there was some gossip about the propriety of it all. Mrs. Henderson appointed herself their unofficial chaperone, making sure they were never alone together for too long, though she was kind about it. The marshal and the town council seemed to approve of Zachary, grateful that he'd saved their schoolteacher and appreciative of his help in recovering the bodies of the other stagecoach passengers. They'd found the 2 other passengers in March, when the snow finally melted enough to allow for a thorough search. A man named Thomas Crawford had made it nearly 2 miles from the crash site before succumbing to the cold. The woman, Sarah Mitchell, had been found just half a mile from the coach. She'd almost made it to an abandoned line shack that could have saved her life. Almost, but not quite. The funerals had been somber affairs. Ellie had wept for the fellow travelers she'd barely known, grateful for her own survival, guilty that she'd lived when they hadn't. Zachary had held her and reminded her that survival was often a matter of luck and timing, not worthiness. As summer approached, the question of their future became more pressing. They'd been courting for nearly 5 months, and it was clear to everyone, including themselves, that this was serious. It was a warm Sunday in June when Zachary finally broached the subject that had been on his mind for weeks. They were sitting by a creek a few miles outside town, watching the water rush past, swollen with snowmelt from the mountains. "Marry me," he said suddenly, the words coming out more bluntly than he'd intended. Ellie turned to look at him, her eyes wide. "What?" Zachary took her hands in his, suddenly nervous. "I know I should do this properly, get down on one knee and everything, but I'm not good at pretty speeches. I love you, Ellie. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you in my arms every night. I want to build a life together, have children together, grow old together. So I'm asking, will you marry me?" Ellie was crying, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling too. "Yes," she said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, of course I'll marry you." Zachary pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply, relief and joy flooding through him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. "I made this for you," he said, suddenly shy. "It's not much, but—" He unwrapped the cloth to reveal a simple ring made of braided silver wire. In the center, he'd set a small piece of amber he'd found in the mountains, polished smooth. It gleamed gold in the sunlight, the exact color of Ellie's eyes. "Zachary, it's beautiful," Ellie breathed as he slipped it onto her finger. "It's perfect." "I wanted something that reminded me of you," he explained. "Your eyes, they're like amber and gold and sunshine all mixed together. The most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Ellie kissed him again, pouring all her love and happiness into it. "When?" she asked when they came up for air. "When should we get married?" "As soon as possible, as far as I'm concerned," Zachary said. "But I know you have your teaching position. I don't want you to give that up if it's important to you." "The school year ends in 2 weeks," Ellie said thoughtfully. "I could finish out the term and then we could get married. The question is where we'll live. I need to be close enough to town to teach when school starts again in September, but I know you can't stand being cooped up in town." I've been thinking about that, Zachary said. What if we build a house halfway between my cabin and town? There's a good spot about 5 miles from Hecla, near a stream, with timber for building. It would be close enough for you to ride to school each day, but far enough out that I wouldn't feel cramped. We could use my cabin as a line shack for when I'm working the trap lines in winter. Ellie's face lit up. That's perfect. We could have our own place, build it exactly how we want it. It won't be fancy, Zachary warned. I'm a decent carpenter, but it'll be basic. 1 or 2 rooms to start, maybe add on as we need more space. I don't need fancy, Ellie said firmly. I just need you, and a roof that doesn't leak and a good stove and maybe some real windows with glass. Zachary laughed. I think I can manage that. They talked for hours, making plans, dreaming about their future together. They would get married in the church in Hecla, a small ceremony with the townspeople as witnesses. They'd spend the summer building their house, with help from some of the miners who owed Zachary favors. Ellie would continue teaching, and Zachary would continue his work as a guide and trapper. It wouldn't be an easy life, but it would be theirs. The announcement of their engagement was met with enthusiasm by most of the town. Mrs. Henderson immediately began planning the wedding, enlisting the other women to help with food and decorations. The marshal offered to give Ellie away, since her own father was back in Boston and unlikely to make the journey. The minister, a kind man named Reverend Peters, agreed to perform the ceremony on the last Saturday in June. The 2 weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of activity. Zachary spent every available hour working on their new house, cutting timber and hauling it to the building site. Several of the miners kept their word and helped with the heavy lifting. The frame went up quickly, and then the walls, rough-hewn logs chinked with mud and moss. Ellie finished her school year with a celebration for her students and their families. She said tearful goodbyes to the children, promising she'd be back in September, married but still their teacher. The parents gave her a beautiful quilt they'd made together, each square sewn by a different family, a token of their appreciation for her dedication. The night before the wedding, Ellie stayed at the boarding house while Zachary camped at the building site of their new home. He couldn't sleep, too excited and nervous and full of anticipation for the next day. He walked the perimeter of their unfinished house, imagining it complete, imagining the life they would build within these walls. The wedding day dawned bright and beautiful. The church was packed with townspeople, everyone dressed in their Sunday best. Ellie wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her dark hair. She looked so beautiful walking down the aisle on the marshal's arm that Zachary felt his throat close with emotion. The ceremony was short and sweet. They exchanged vows in voices that shook slightly with feeling, promised to love and cherish each other for the rest of their lives. When Reverend Peters pronounced them man and wife and told Zachary he could kiss his bride, the whole church erupted in cheers. The celebration afterward was joyful and loud, with music and dancing and more food than seemed possible from such a small town. Zachary danced with his new wife under the summer stars, holding her close, breathing in the lavender scent of her hair, overwhelmed with gratitude that she was his. "Happy?" Ellie asked, smiling up at him. "Happier than I ever thought I could be," Zachary replied honestly. "You've given me everything, Ellie. A home, a future, a reason to believe in tomorrow." "You gave me the same thing," Ellie said softly. "You saved my life in more ways than one." They left the celebration late in the evening, riding double on copper toward their new house. It wasn't finished yet, but Zachary had made sure one room was complete and livable, with a real bed and a working stove and glass windows that caught the moonlight. He carried Ellie over the threshold, both of them laughing, giddy with happiness and love and the promise of their future together. He set her down gently, and they stood in the center of their new home, looking around at the space that was entirely theirs. "Welcome home, Mrs. Stark," Zachary said softly. "Home," Ellie repeated, testing out the word. "I like the sound of that." They made love that night in their own bed, in their own house, learning each other with gentle hands and whispered words. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Ellie's head on Zachary's chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I never thought I could have this," Zachary murmured into the darkness. "After the war, after Mary, I thought I was meant to be alone. I made peace with it, or thought I had, and then a blizzard brought you into my life and changed everything." "Do you ever think about that night?" Ellie asked. "About what would have happened if you hadn't found me?" "More than I want to admit. The thought of you dying out there in the snow, of never knowing you, never loving you." He tightened his arms around her. "It doesn't bear thinking about." "But you did find me," Ellie said, tilting her head up to kiss his jaw. "Against all odds, in the middle of a blizzard, you found me. That has to mean something. It means I'm the luckiest man alive." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, the Montana wind singing softly outside their window. The summer passed in a haze of happiness and hard work. They finished the house together, Ellie learning carpentry skills she never would have dreamed of back in Boston. They added a second room, a proper kitchen, a front porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sun set over the mountains. Ellie proved to be stronger and more capable than anyone had given her credit for, including herself. She learned to hunt and fish, to preserve food for winter, to raid the weather and the land. She could ride as well as any man, could shoot a rifle with respectable accuracy, could help Zachary with his work when he needed an extra pair of hands. But she never gave up her love of teaching. When September came, she rode into Hecla each morning, taught her students with passion and dedication, and rode home each evening to the house and the husband she loved. It was exhausting, but she thrived on it. Zachary, for his part, had never been happier. He continued his work as a guide and trapper, but now he had a reason to come home, someone waiting for him at the end of each day. Ellie filled the empty spaces in his life he hadn't even known were there. She challenged him, made him laugh, loved him with a fierce devotion that still took his breath away. Winter came again, bringing snow and cold and long dark nights. But this winter was different from the last. This winter, Zachary wasn't alone. He and Ellie would sit by the fire in the evenings, Ellie grading papers or reading while Zachary carved wood or mended his traps. Sometimes they would talk for hours, about everything and nothing. Other times they would sit in comfortable silence, content just to be together. On the anniversary of the blizzard that had brought them together, Zachary and Ellie made a special trip to the spot where he'd found her. The landscape was buried under snow again, looking much as it had that night, though the weather was clear and calm. "Right about here," Zachary said, pointing to a spot that looked identical to every other spot around them. "This is where you were lying." Ellie stood in the snow, looking around at the vast white expanse. "I can't believe I survived. I should have died out here. But you didn't. You survived, and we found each other, and we built a life together. That's what matters. Do you ever wonder what your life would be like if you'd ridden past that night, if you'd been so focused on getting home that you missed seeing me?" "All the time," Zachary admitted, "and it terrifies me. The thought of a world where I never met you, where I'm still alone in that cabin, living half a life. It makes me grateful for every single day we have together." Ellie took his hand, squeezing tight. "Me too. That storm was the worst and best thing that ever happened to me. I lost so much, but I gained everything that matters." They stood together in the snow in the place where their story had begun, Grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together, spring returned as it always did. The snow melted, revealing the land beneath. Wildflowers bloomed across the plains, and Ellie discovered she was pregnant. She told Zachary one evening in April, her eyes bright with excitement and nervousness. They'd been hoping for a child, talking about it in quiet moments, but the reality of it still felt momentous. Zachary swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet, laughing with pure joy. "A baby. We're going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Ellie asked, though she could see the answer written all over his face. Happy doesn't even begin to cover it. "Ellie, you've already given me more than I ever dreamed of. And now this." He set her down gently, his hand going to her still flat stomach. "A child, our child. It's almost too much." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Ellie continued teaching through the spring and into early summer, finally stopping when the school year ended, and her growing belly made riding into town uncomfortable. She spent the summer preparing for the baby's arrival, sewing tiny clothes, setting up a cradle that Zachary had carved with his own hands. Zachary was alternately excited and terrified. He read every book on childbirth and infant care that Ellie had brought from Boston, asked Mrs. Henderson endless questions, made sure they had everything they might need. He built an addition onto the house, a nursery with windows facing east to catch the morning sun. The baby came in October, on a cool autumn morning when the aspens were golden on the mountainsides. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Zachary feared he would lose both mother and child. But Ellie was strong, stronger than he'd ever known, and when the sun rose the next morning, she placed a tiny, perfect baby boy in his arms. "Henry," she said softly, watching Zachary cradle their son. "After your father," Zachary nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He'd never held anything so small, so fragile, so precious. Henry had a shock of dark hair like his mother and blue eyes that would probably change color as he grew. His tiny fingers wrapped around Zachary's thumb with surprising strength. "He's perfect," Zachary finally managed. "You're perfect. I don't know what I did to deserve this, to deserve you." "You saved me," Ellie said simply. "You carried me through a blizzard and warmed me by your fire, and you've been saving me every day since, just by loving me." Life with a baby was challenging in ways Zachary had never anticipated. The sleepless nights, the constant worry, the overwhelming responsibility of keeping such a tiny human alive. But it was also filled with moments of piercing joy. Henry's first smile, directed at Ellie. The way he would quiet when Zachary sang to him in a rumbling baritone. The feeling of his small weight sleeping on Zachary's chest, trusting and peaceful. Ellie proved to be a natural mother, patient and loving, and somehow always knowing what Henry needed. She took to motherhood the same way she'd taken to teaching and to frontier life, with determination and grace and an open heart. When Henry was 6 months old, Ellie announced she was ready to return to teaching part-time. Mrs. Henderson volunteered to watch Henry during the mornings, and Ellie would ride into Hecla 3 days a week to work with her students. It was a good compromise, allowing her to continue the work she loved while still being present for their son. The years passed, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of Henry's growth. His first steps, taken on a summer day in the garden Ellie had planted. His first words, "Mama," followed quickly by "Papa." His delight in the animals, in the vastness of the sky, in the stories his parents told him. When Henry was 3, Ellie gave birth to their daughter, Sarah. She came into the world screaming her outrage at the cold and the brightness, a fighter from the start. She had Zachary's dark eyes and Ellie's fierce spirit, and she had both her parents wrapped around her tiny finger from the moment she arrived. Zachary had never imagined he could be this happy. His days were full of work and purpose, his evenings full of laughter and love. He would watch Ellie reading to their children by the fire and feel such overwhelming gratitude it brought tears to his eyes. This life, this family, this love, it was everything he'd never known he wanted. One winter evening, when Henry was 5 and Sarah was 2, the family gathered around the fire as snow fell softly outside. It was the anniversary of the blizzard, now 6 years past, and it had become tradition to mark the occasion. "Tell us the story, Papa," Henry demanded, snuggling against Zachary's side. "Tell us how you found Mama." Zachary looked at Ellie across the fire, their eyes meeting in perfect understanding. She was holding Sarah, who was already drowsy, her dark curls falling across her mother's arm. "Well," Zachary began, "it was the coldest night of the year, and the wind was howling like a pack of wolves." He told the story the way he always did, making it exciting enough to hold Henry's attention but not so scary that it would give him nightmares. He described the storm, the desperate search, the moment he'd found Ellie half buried in snow. He talked about carrying her to safety, about warming her by the fire, about the week they'd spent together in his cabin falling in love. "And then, Mama came to live with you and you got married and had me." Henry finished triumphantly, having heard the story many times. "That's right," Ellie confirmed. "Your papa saved my life, and then he gave me the greatest gifts I could ever ask for. A home, a family, and love that grows stronger every single day." "I love you, Mama," Henry said solemnly. "And you too, Papa." "We love you too, sweetheart," Ellie said. "Both of you more than all the stars in the sky." Later, after the children were asleep in their beds, Zachary and Ellie sat together on the porch despite the cold, wrapped in blankets and each other's arms. The sky was clear now, stars brilliant against the black, the same stars that had watched over them that first night. "You ever regret it?" Zachary asked quietly. "Giving up your life in Boston, the comfort and security you had there?" "Not for a single second," Ellie said firmly. "I was dying in Boston, just in a different way than I would have died in that blizzard. I was suffocating under expectations and rules and a life that was never meant to be mine. You didn't just save my body that night, Zachary. You saved my soul." "You saved mine too," Zachary replied. "I was so lost before you. I thought I was content living alone, but I was just existing, not truly living. You taught me how to live again, how to love again, how to hope for tomorrow." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind in the pines, the distant cry of an owl, the peaceful sounds of their life together. "I used to wonder why that storm came when it did," Ellie mused. "Why I survived when others didn't. It seemed so random, so cruel. But now I think maybe there was a reason. Maybe we were meant to find each other, meant to build this life together." "I like to think so," Zachary said. "Though I'm not sure we deserve this much happiness." "Maybe happiness isn't about deserving," Ellie suggested. "Maybe it's about recognizing it when it appears and having the courage to hold on to it." "Then I'll hold on to you forever," Zachary promised, tightening his arms around her. "You and our children and this beautiful life we've made. I'll hold on and never let go." "Forever," Ellie echoed, turning her face up for a kiss. "That sounds just about right." The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges, but always underpinned by the love that had bloomed in the midst of a blizzard. Henry grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books as much as his mother and the wilderness as much as his father. Sarah was wild and fearless, climbing trees and chasing animals and keeping both her parents on their toes. When Henry was 7 and Sarah was 4, Ellie gave birth to twins, much to everyone's shock. 2 boys, identical down to the cowlick in their dark hair. They named them James and Jacob, and the house that had once seemed spacious suddenly felt very small. Zachary built another addition, expanding the house to accommodate their growing family. He was in his early 40s now, his dark hair threaded with silver, lines deepening around his eyes. But he was strong and healthy, and fatherhood suited him. He was patient and kind with his children, teaching them everything he knew about the land and survival and honor. Ellie had given up teaching by this point, finding her hands too full with 4 children to manage a classroom as well. She didn't miss it as much as she'd thought she might. She found joy in teaching her own children, in watching them grow and learn, in creating a home filled with love and laughter. The town of Hecla grew over the years, though it would never be large. New families arrived, drawn by the mines and the promise of land. The children that Ellie had taught in her early years in Montana were now young adults, some starting families of their own, many staying in the area to build their lives. People remembered the story of how Ellie and Zachary had found each other. It became a local legend, the tale of the schoolteacher who survived a blizzard and the man who saved her, a testament to love and fate and the wild nature of Montana itself. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zachary surprised Ellie with a trip, just the two of them. Mrs. Henderson agreed to watch the children for a few days, and Zachary took Ellie up into the mountains to a spot he'd discovered years ago, a hidden valley with a clear lake that reflected the peaks like a mirror. They camped under the stars, cooked fish over an open fire, and talked like they had in those early days, before children and responsibilities had claimed so much of their time and attention. "I forget sometimes," Ellie admitted, lying in Zachary's arms and looking up at the stars. "I forget how it felt in the beginning when it was just us. Everything is wonderful now, don't misunderstand. I love our life, our children. But sometimes I miss this, just you and me and the wilderness." "I know what you mean," Zachary said. "I love our kids more than life itself, but they do tend to dominate every waking moment. It's nice to remember what it was like before, to reconnect with just each other. We should do this more often, get away just the two of us." "Agreed. Maybe we can make it a tradition. Once or twice a year, we escape to the wilderness and remember why we fell in love in the first place." "I don't need reminding," Ellie said, turning to kiss him. "I fall in love with you all over again every single day." They made love under the stars, slow and sweet and intimate in a way that was harder to achieve with children sleeping down the hall. Afterward, they lay tangled together, listening to the sounds of the night. "Zachary," Ellie said sleepily. Thank you. For what?" "For everything. For saving me, for loving me, for building this beautiful life with me. For being exactly the partner I needed, even when I didn't know what that was." "I should be thanking you," Zachary replied. "You took a broken, lonely man and made him whole again. You gave me a family, a home, a reason to wake up smiling every morning. I love you, Ellie, more now than even on the day we married. I love you too, always and forever." They returned home to their children, refreshed and reconnected, ready to dive back into the beautiful chaos of family life. The years continued their steady march forward. Henry grew tall and serious, showing aptitude for engineering that amazed his parents. Sarah remained wild and wonderful, declaring she wanted to be a veterinarian and spending every spare moment with the animals. The twins, James and Jacob, were inseparable troublemakers who kept everyone laughing and occasionally pulling their hair out. When Ellie was 42, they had one last surprise. Another daughter, born during a spring rainstorm. They named her Violet, for the wildflowers that grew in abundance around their home. She was a quiet, peaceful baby, the calm after the storm of raising 4 other children. "I think this is it," Ellie told Zachary one night, holding Violet while the baby nursed. 5 children is plenty. More than plenty. Zachary laughed, leaning over to kiss Ellie's forehead and touch Violet's soft cheek. I won't argue with that. Our house is full, our lives are full, our hearts are full. We've been blessed beyond measure. We have, Ellie agreed. Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life, that I get to live in this beautiful place with this beautiful family, that I found you. I'm the one who found you, Zachary reminded her with a smile. Half frozen in a snowbank, if memory serves. Best day of my life, Ellie said, and she meant it. Time moved forward as it always does. The children grew, developed their own personalities, their own dreams. Henry went to university in Helena, studying engineering like he'd always wanted. Sarah became a veterinary assistant, traveling around Montana helping ranchers and farmers with their animals. The twins went into business together, opening a general store in Hecla that quickly became the heart of the community. Violet, the baby, showed signs of following in her mother's footsteps, with a love of teaching and a natural way with children. Zachary and Ellie grew older gracefully, silver threading through their hair, lines deepening on their faces, but their love never dimming. They became the couple that young people looked to as an example, proof that true love existed and could last a lifetime. On the 20th anniversary of the blizzard that had brought them together, Zachary and Ellie made a pilgrimage to the spot where it had all begun. They were in their 50s now, their children grown or nearly so, grandchildren starting to appear. The landscape was covered in snow, as it had been that night 20 years ago, but the sky was clear and the wind was gentle. They stood hand in hand in the spot where Zachary had found Ellie, marveling at how much had changed and how much had stayed the same. 20 years, Ellie said softly. It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. Best 20 years of my life, Zachary said. Though that first day was rough, I wasn't sure you were going to make it. But I did, thanks to you, thanks to both of us. You're the one who fought to survive, who refused to give up. I had something to live for, even though I didn't know it yet. Ellie squeezed his hand. I had you waiting for me just a few miles away, ready to save me and love me and build a life with me. Fate, Zachary said. Fate, Ellie agreed. Or luck, or divine intervention, or whatever you want to call it. We found each other when we both needed it most. They stood in silence for a while, watching the sun set over the mountains, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. The same mountains that had witnessed their first meeting, that had watched over their courtship and marriage and the raising of their family. Should we head back? Ellie asked eventually. The kids are expecting us for dinner. In a minute, Zachary said. I just want to stand here a little longer in this spot where everything began. I want to remember what it felt like that night, the fear and the hope, and the sense that I was holding something infinitely precious in my arms. You still hold something precious, Ellie said, leaning into him. You still hold me. And I always will, Zachary promised. Until the day I die and beyond. You're mine, Ellie, and I'm yours, bound together by a blizzard and love and 20 years of building a life together. Forever, Ellie whispered. Forever, Zachary echoed. They rode home together through the gathering darkness, toward the house that glowed with light and warmth, toward the family that waited for them, toward the life they had built from a chance meeting in a storm. Behind them, the spot where Zachary had found Ellie was quiet and peaceful, just another patch of Montana wilderness. But for two people, it was sacred ground, the place where their story had begun and where their love had been forged in ice and fire and desperation. The years continued to pass in the way they do, marked by seasons and celebrations, births and occasional sorrows, but always underpinned by the enduring love of two people who had found each other against all odds. When Zachary and Ellie were in their 60s, They finally sold their home and moved into Hecla proper, into a small house near the church. The wilderness was getting harder to manage, and they wanted to be closer to their children and grandchildren, who had spread throughout Montana but always came back to Hecla for holidays and special occasions. The grandchildren loved hearing the story of how their grandparents met, would beg for it to be told over and over. Zachary and Ellie would oblige, tag-teaming the narrative, finishing each other's sentences, their eyes meeting across whatever room they were in with perfect understanding. "And then what happened, Grandpa?" a small voice would ask. "Then I carried your grandmother miles through the snow, fighting against wind that tried to knock me down through drifts up to my waist. And you saved her." "I did. I got her to my cabin and warmed her by the fire, and she came back to life like a flower after rain. Most beautiful thing I ever saw. And then you fell in love." "Then we fell in love," Ellie would confirm. "And we got married and had your mama or your papa and built a life together that's been more wonderful than anything I could have imagined." "Do you still love Grandpa?" the children would ask Ellie. "More than ever," she would reply, reaching for Zachary's hand. Love isn't something that fades if you tend it properly. It grows stronger with time, deeper with shared experiences, richer with every year you spend together. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the whole town of Hecla turned out to celebrate. Their 5 children were there, along with spouses, and a total of 12 grandchildren ranging in age from infant to teenager. Friends they'd made over the decades, students Ellie had taught who were now middle-aged themselves, fellow guides Zachary had worked with, all came to honor the couple who had become a cornerstone of the community. Zachary and Ellie stood together in the church where they'd been married half a century before, renewing their vows in front of everyone they loved. Zachary's voice was still strong despite his 72 years, Ellie's eyes still bright despite the lines that time had etched around them. "I, Zachary, take you, Eleanor, to be my wife for another 50 years, he said, deviating from the traditional vows. "You've given me a lifetime of happiness, and if I'm lucky enough to get more years with you, I'll treasure every single one." "I, Eleanor, take you, Zachary, for however many years we have left," Ellie replied, tears streaming down her face. "You saved me in that blizzard, and you've been saving me every day since. You're my hero, my partner, my best friend, and the love of my life." They kissed to thunderous applause, and the celebration that followed was joyful and loud and full of love. Zachary and Ellie danced together, moving slowly but gracefully, still perfectly in sync after all these years. "No regrets?" Zachary asked as they swayed to the music. "Not a single one," Ellie replied. "You, just that I didn't find you sooner. I would have liked a few more years with you. We got 50 years. That's more than most people get, still not enough. I could have 100 years with you and it wouldn't be enough." They lived quietly in Hecla for several more years, enjoying retirement and grandchildren, and the peace that comes from a life well lived. They took walks together every day, weather permitting, often ending up at the spot on the edge of town where Zachary had first told Ellie he loved her all those years ago. Zachary passed first, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78. He simply didn't wake up one winter morning, his heart having given out during the night. Ellie woke to find him still beside her, peaceful and gone, and she held him and wept for the loss of her partner, her love, her everything. The funeral was huge, with people coming from all over Montana to pay their respects. Zachary had touched many lives during his time in the territory, had saved more than just Ellie over the years, had earned respect and affection from everyone who knew him. Ellie bore her grief with quiet dignity, supported by her children and grandchildren. But everyone could see that a light had gone out inside her. She'd lost half of herself, the part that had completed her for over 50 years. She lived for 2 more years without him, staying in the little house in Hecla, surrounded by memories and photographs and love. She told her grandchildren stories about their grandfather, keeping his memory alive, making sure they knew what an extraordinary man he had been. On a cold January night, 2 years to the day after Zachary's death, Ellie passed away in her sleep. She was 80 years old, and she went peacefully, with a small smile on her face. Her children liked to imagine that Zachary had been waiting for her, that they were together again somewhere beyond death. They buried her next to Zachary in the cemetery on the hill overlooking Hecla. The marker was simple, with both their names and the dates they'd lived. But someone, one of their children or grandchildren, added an inscription below. He found her lost in a blizzard, carried her miles, and warmed her by his fire. Together they built a love that outlasted the storms. People in Hecla still tell the story of Zachary and Ellie Stark, the couple brought together by chance and fate and a Montana blizzard. Young people listen wide-eyed to the tale of survival and love, of a man who wouldn't give up and a woman who fought to live, of a partnership that weathered every storm and emerged stronger. Their descendants spread throughout Montana and beyond, carrying with them the legacy of 2 people who proved that love can bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, that the hardest trials can lead to the greatest blessings, and that sometimes the best thing that can happen to you appears in the middle of your worst nightmare. The cabin where Zachary first took Ellie still stands, maintained now by their great-grandchildren as a family retreat. The house they built together halfway between wilderness and civilization eventually fell to time and weather, but a historical marker stands at the site, telling passers-by about the family who lived there, who chose to make their home on the edge of 2 worlds. On cold winter nights, when the wind howls across the Montana plains and snow falls thick and fast, people in Hecla remember the blizzard that brought their town's most beloved couple together. They remember Zachary Stark riding through the storm, refusing to give up, finding Ellie when all hope seemed lost. They remember the love that grew from that desperate night, strong and true and enduring. And they tell their children and grandchildren the story, keeping alive the memory of 2 people who proved that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best, that love can be found in the most unexpected places, and that a single act of courage and compassion can change everything. The story of Zachary and Ellie Stark became legend, a reminder that in the wild and unforgiving landscape of the Montana frontier, the greatest treasures weren't gold or land or power, but the connections between human hearts, the bonds that could survive any storm and outlast any hardship. He found her lost in a blizzard, carried her miles and warmed her by his fire, and in doing so, saved not just her life but both their souls. Together they built a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone, a testament to the power of compassion, courage, and the refusal to give up even when everything seems lost. Their story ended, as all stories must, but the love they shared and the family they created continued on, generation after generation, carrying forward the legacy of 2 souls who found each other in a Montana snowstorm and chose to build a life together that would inspire people for generations to come.